everybody, welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing something a little different, a little departure from talking about handbags. I had a request to bake something from one of my YouTube friends because she had heard one of my videos in which I was discussing that at one time I was a hobbyist baker, and I was up until the time I started YouTube actually, because I haven't been able to bake too much with being involved with YouTube, because YouTube is it takes all my time and all my thought, so I haven't baked. However, I'm going to bake now as per her request, and shout out to Gracie. And so I haven't done this before, so I hope it goes well. I am not doing any editing. So what I did was I baked a cake first so I could show you the finished product, and now I'm going to do it again with you. Now this is a very simple cake. I never baked before. I started becoming a hobbyist about 10 years ago, and I followed the recipes of mostly Rose Levy Berenbaum, and this is the book that I recommend more than any book. She has several. She's the author of the Cake Bible, but this is my favorite book of hers. Whenever I bake a cake out of this book, well, not all the time, but people have said when I brought it to gatherings, who baked that cake? Her bakes are really remarkable, and her directions are extremely precise. I have other books where they just tell you cream this, mix that. You have to have technique aside from the actual recipe, and she teaches technique. And you could take her techniques and use it and apply it to any other recipe, most of the other recipes, and you would be ahead of the game, I think. I apply it and I always have a lot of success. So this recipe that we're doing today is not out of this book. It's a very simple recipe. I figured I'd start with that because I would have to do editing to do a more involved recipe, because it takes several steps, and I'd have to pause the camera and cut, and I don't know how to do that right now. So this is a recipe that is actually a vegan cake. And this cake was invented during World War II, when dairy and meat and all those expensive things were rationed. So there is no dairy, there is no eggs, so that's why it is a vegan cake. It's not meant for health purposes. However, you could get this recipe basically all over the web, and it goes by the name of Wowie cake or Wacky cake. I use it out of this book, Vintage Cakes, and in this is by Julie Richardson, and I made a couple of recipes out of this book, not much, but this is, and they're all good. Whichever I've made was very good, but I followed this recipe, which is basically the same recipe that you could get if you Google it. Her weight measurements are in cups and ounces, which I do not use cups and ounces. I use grams. So if there is a recipe in ounces or cups, I always convert it to grams. And I have these little notes in all my books, because I don't write on my books, because yes, I'm also anal about books, not only pocketbooks. I am. So I'm going to do this really quickly, but let me show you how to remove a cake from a cake pan, just in case you don't know. This is the finished product, and it is called the Wowie cake or the Wacky cake. And usually I don't use anything but pure aluminum pans, but in this is a very sticky cake. So in this cake I did use a it's like a non-stick pan. So to invert a cake and remove it from a pan, you need two flat surfaces. I use cake coolers and cooling racks, and these I think are the best to use in my opinion. So I put the cake cooler down, the cooling rack down. Take a clean towel and put it on the cooling rack. Well, it was clean, but for purposes purposes, we'll just make believe that didn't happen. And I also take a piece of wax paper. You could use wax paper, parchment paper, tin foil, or Rose Levy Berenbaum recommends plastic, but whenever I use plastic like a saran wrap kind of thing, it sticks to the pan, so that's my least favorite thing to use. So I use wax paper rather. So I have a towel and wax paper down here, and I put it over the cake. So now I have the cake in the middle of two cooling racks. Flip it over. Take the cake pan off. And I have it like this. I have a piece of parchment, circle parchment on top of the cake. This is when you remove it. Put the cooling rack on top and then flip it again. And this is the cake. This is a base layer. This cake recipe, actually, I didn't know about it. It was given to me. I was in a group, a baking group, and somebody who was a home baker, just like me, only much more advanced, was written up in bridal magazines for her wedding cakes. And she told me to use this recipe, and she uses this a lot in wedding cakes. Let me move it closer to you. In my house, we eat this like this. We eat it plain, but you could put ice, you could make two of them and make a layer cake, or you could put frosting on one, or cream cheese frosting, or you can put a glaze on here. And I particularly like glazes because to me glazes are the most healthy. I don't really like frostings because if you have to start using lard, shortening, things like that, I don't like the idea of that. And with glazes, all you have to do is take sugar, which is confectioner's sugar, powdered sugar, and a liquid such as, well, heavy cream is the best. You could use half and half, you could use milk, you could use water, you could use juice. So you mix the confectioner's sugar and the liquid. You mix it up and then you just drizzle it on with a fork. You let it drip off and it drips down the sides, or you could use a brush or anything you want, and it's really delicious. So this is going to stay on the side and cool. I'm going to use this pan again right now. I would normally never use a pan that I just used, but because I can't do all these things on camera, I'm just going to use it. And this is how I grease the pan. I use, but this particular recipe is very sticky. I use Spectrum Canola Oil spray. It has a flour in it. When you use a spray, for baking, it has to have flour in it. This is what you'll find in most of the stores. This particular thing is not organic, but they do have an organic. I use their oils. They have some. This is not organic oil, but I do have their organic oils as well. It's very, very hard to find this brand. This brand is excellent, but it is not as natural as this one is. And if you're baking and you're baking in a bun pan such as this, which has a very intricate design, you want to make sure that the whole cake comes out and not that pieces are broken off and stuck. So Baker's Joy is very good for intricate design. So I just wanted to show you I'm not using it. So I spray the pans lightly. And I use parchment on everything. Where is the parchment? Oh, here it is. This is from King Arthur's Flour. they have a baking site, and they're in stores, and their products are very good. So take a piece of the round. If you don't have it already made, like this, already cut, you could take a piece of regular parchment paper, put whatever pan you want, what that you're going to use, on the paper, and take a pencil and go exactly on the edge, then cut. And then it won't, then you'll have the same thing as this. But on the rounds I get this because it comes out a little nicer and fits the pan better. And I put that down, so it's in the bottom of the pan. Now the oven is heating at 350. And this is a very easy recipe. It takes 15 minutes from this point to the point it gets into the oven. It requires 2 bowls, and that's it. And a strainer, because in this recipe, this is a modified recipe, and this recipe is modified from that woman who I told you does the bridal wedding cakes and was in the bridal magazines. Instead of it just being flour, I put 37 grams, and I guess that's about a little more than an ounce, of almond flour in place of the original amount of flour. So instead of it being how much flour they want, it's supposed to be you're supposed to use 6 tablespoons of cocoa to add flavor. So instead of cocoa, I replaced the cocoa with the almond flour. You could use cocoa too, but everybody seems to like the almond flour a lot better. And that comes to, the 6 tablespoons comes to 37 grams. So I'll try not to make this boring with all the ounces and grams and everything like that. I'll just tell you basically. So everything I do is on a scale. This is my scale, and it has the ability to tare, T-A-R-E, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Maybe it's pronounced differently, but I call it tare. So what you could do, you put this bowl on here, you put your ingredients in here, and then you press tare, and then it goes back to 0. So you could add new ingredients with the weight without dirtying all the little containers that they call mise en place. You have your salt in one little bowl and your flour in another bowl, and you add it. This, using the tare, avoids all those little things that you have to wash afterwards. So put that on, and the recipe calls for 213 grams of all-purpose flour, and I use King Arthur all-purpose flour. So you have to zero it to make sure that after you put the bowl on the scale, the scale is at 0, and 213 grams. Done with the flour. "37 grams of almond flour or cocoa, and that cocoa is natural cocoa, which is Hershey's unsweetened, not sweetened cocoa. That is 37 grams. So you're not actually measuring it in a measuring spoon. You're just using this like a shovel. You tare it again, so it brings it back to 0. One more spoon should do it. Perfect. Well, we got to 39. when you're not using it, it's best to store in the freezer. Take this bag, take the bag it comes in, put it in a plastic bag and freeze it. Now the next ingredient is a cup of sugar. A cup of sugar is 200 grams. Almost finished with all the dry things. Next is baking soda, which is a teaspoon, and that is actually a teaspoon that we use. I keep my baking soda in here because it never closes once you open this. That's baking soda. When I first started baking, I always used to mistake baking soda and baking powder. Did that a lot. So you want to make sure that you actually have a teaspoon, so you take a level and scoop, level it off so it's nice and flat. And the next ingredient is sea salt. I always use sea salt, but I stopped because I read an article about impurities. So I use good old Morton iodized salt, and this is 1/4 of a teaspoon, I believe. Half a teaspoon. Okay, that's the dry things. Now what we have to do is I put it in here, and what we want to do is make sure that it's all this, the almond flour is a little dense and a little moist, so we want to make sure everything is even. So I take here it is, a whisk. This is a balloon whisk, and this is OXO's, and whisk it. To try and combine it all. But I don't stop there. I take another bowl, because we're going to use this bowl anyway, so it's not like we're dirtying a bowl just for this. And I sift it by taking a strainer, putting it on top of this bowl, letting this go through the strainer. All the dry things that we just put together. And you take your whisk, and now there's a little, there's a little resistance because of the almond flour, because it's thicker. Now I usually do this again. I go into the second bowl, but I won't do it this time because you get the idea. So this is your dry thing. So we put this away. Let me just wipe this. Now we do the wet ingredients. Bring this scale back to 0 again. The first wet ingredient, I do the oil first because if there's any kind of a mistake, it's easier to correct than if you put water then oil into it, because then you have to throw everything away and start again. So the oil is 72 grams. Now, liquids are not measured in grams. They measured in fluid ounces. So this scale does not measure fluid ounces, but it measures the actual physical weight of the ingredient. So this comes to 72 grams. And that is actually supposed to be a 1/3 of a cup of canola oil, which is 72 grams. So add the oil until scale gets to 72. Okay, and then we have to put cold water. Now, once I did just warm water, just a plain bottle of water from, you know, those little bottles that you get, and the cake came out like a pancake, so it has to be cold. Oh, wait. This I have ready. In here. This is 236 grams, which is a cup of cold water. Now we add white vinegar, which is this. And this is a tablespoon, which is supposed to be 15 grams. So tar your scale. That's 14, so I'm going to get just a drop more. And another drop more. And another drop more. Okay, got it. So this is very important, and a lot of the vegan recipes use vinegar. It really helps with, it's like a magic ingredient in cakes. And then we use vanilla. I think this is the best vanilla. And there was a shortage of vanilla a few years back. This used to be $9 for 4 ounces, which I thought that was a lot of money. It went up to $30. I bought this, it was $19.99. So $19.99. So, and this I use a teaspoon of, which is supposed to be 5 grams. Perfect. Okay. Now what we do is we have to whisk this and combine it so the oil and the water stays together long enough to get into the dry ingredients. So it looks like it's all one color, like a chicken soup actually. Pour it in here. I have one of these. It's great. Since this is measured in grams, every drop counts. It's not like you're measuring in ounces where you have leeway where you usually have more ingredients than you really need. This is a bowl scraper. This is fantastic. Gets every drop out. Take a wooden spoon and don't over mix it, just mix it till it all comes together. I don't want to spill it either, so I'll show you. You could have lumps. Just make sure you get it on the bottom so there's no actual flour that hasn't been included. Take your prepared pan. By the way, vegan doesn't always mean healthy. This has sugar. This has a whole cup of sugar in it. This will be 6 to 8 slices of cake, 6-8 pieces of cake. So, or more or less depending upon how you cut it. So keep in mind that vegan means just no animal products, not healthy. It could be healthy, but it could not be healthy. Vegan meals could be just French fries and ketchup. I use these spatulas, offset spatulas, and I even out the cake by going around. I go around, I move the pan and try and keep the spatula straight to get everything even without actually going into the cake. And there's hardly any batter on here. Put it in the oven. In my oven, this cooks perfectly 37 minutes. However, in the recipe, they tell you to bake it for 30 minutes, and I find that it doesn't come out. It's too soft. It needs 37 minutes. So this is what it will look like when it comes out. Let's cut it and see how it looks. You should always use serrated edge when you're cutting cake. This is called, I have a Worcester half, but the scallops on here, I don't know what you would actually call it. The serrated part is very deep, and it's basically for bread. This is a little lighter scallop, and I think it's easier on cakes. And this is called Mac the knife. It's a Japanese cake. I don't normally cut on a cooling rack. I usually put it on a dish by now, but it's very, very moist. Very moist. It came a little apart and it's dropping on the floor. Let me show you this way. And it's really very good. In fact, my family likes it so much that I often bring several cakes with me when I'm in New York. This is one of them, and my grandchildren love this, and it's a really good cake, and it has a lot of possibilities. Of course, you could eat it plain, and I like it plain. You could, as I said, you could drizzle a glaze on it, a sugar glaze, and that's really delicious. You could do that sugar glaze on anything you bake, or you could put frosting, and you could put multiple layers. So thank you everybody for watching. I know this was a departure and all, but I hope you found this interesting, and it's I was able to do it this way because I don't edit, as I told you. Something more involved would probably require editing, and maybe one day when I get to learn that, I'll be able to do more involved baking, if you care to see it. If you would like me to do more recipes, just let me know in the comments. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I love you guys. If you're having bad weather, I hope you're being just nice and warm and safe. And we're going to be having snow this all week. So I'm going to be staying in nice and cozy and watching everybody's YouTube videos. Take care, everybody. I love you. And you take care, and thank you so much for joining me.